We are, Ashley last week started a new series that we're going through called Road Trips and Realizations, and so we're going to get into that in just a second. And as I was preparing for this, as I was kind of looking over and thinking about this, I was remembering, this is such a random thing. I graduated from college way too long ago, and I remember when I went to college, my very first semester, I took a philosophy class, and I grew up in rural Oklahoma, not a lot of philosophy classes at Hinton High School. So I got to take my very first philosophy class, and the name of the class was The Meaning of Life, which is quite a thing to cover in your first semester in college. And so we were exposed to all sorts of ideas and new thinkers and new writing that I had never, it really kind of opened my eyes. And the theme of the course was all of these different writers are talking about what is the meaning of life? Again, a big question for a freshman year of college. But I was into it. I thought it was a really interesting class. And I remember on the last day of class before the final, we actually had 3 professors in the department that would rotate. And they said on the very last day of class, we are going to tell you, each of your professors is going to tell you what they believe the meaning of life is, which is I'll buy tickets to that. You get a sense as the class goes on that these guys have had a rough go of it. You know what I mean? Life has not been kind to these 3 philosophy professors. And so the meaning of life conversation is going to get a little interesting. And I remember one of the guys, if I were to tell you, close your eyes and picture a philosophy professor, you got it. That's what this guy looked like. Long ponytail, flip-flops and slacks, this is the guy. And so he gets up and he says, I'm going to tell you what the meaning of life is. Life has no meaning. And he said, life is pointless. And the reason life is pointless, he says, is because we spend so much time wasting time. And he talked about, you and I spend so much time going from point A to point B. We spend so much time in transit. These are his words. We spend so much time in transit. We spend so much time wasting time because we're never where we're trying to be. We're always in motion, going from one place to another. That how could life have meaning if we are never in one place for very long? And Merry Christmas. Have a good luck on your final. I don't know exactly. Everybody left a little bit bummed out. But the thing is, and I've remembered that. It's 20 something years ago, and I've remembered that ever since. Thinking when we talk about when we are moving from one place to another, when I have left one space and I'm not quite to the next space, when I'm in this liminal, in between, nondescript, in transit space, is that a wasted season? Is that wasted motion? Is that me losing time? And the more I thought, and I think this is where we're going with this series. Is that maybe no, actually that space in between where you came from and where you're going, this in motion thing actually is where we find a lot of meaning and where we find a lot of who we are actually called to be. It's in these moments of transit that we discover all sorts of new things, because otherwise we're just stagnant and we don't move and we don't go from any space to any space. And that, to me, stagnation feels like a lack of meaning and not motion. And so I respectfully disagree with my philosophy professor 22 years later. But I'm glad, I'm glad he has some ideas. I worry for his, mental well-being. But that's not up to me. But there's this question of, okay, so while we are in sort of these moments of transition, what are we looking for? And so that kind of is one of the core questions of this series. So the series, again, is called Road Trips and Realizations, which is, again, we're posing the question, what can we learn from stories in the Bible specifically about people who are in transit, who are on the move, who are coming from one place and going to another? What is it? Where do we find our own stories in these stories? So understanding that, I also understand that we are here today in the midst of everybody's moving from summer into non-summer mentality, right? Anybody who is in any way connected to a school system or something that has a seasonal rhythm to it, all of a sudden we are all in some state of transition, are we not? How many times this last week did somebody ask you, are your kids going back to school this week? Because that is a reasonable question. That is a thing, and I'm not saying that's a bad question, because that's a thing that we're all kind of going through. So everybody's getting back into this non-summer routine. And how many of us, though, it's been 5 days and already you are a little bit exhausted and you're a little bit stressed out about everything and you're I was not ready like I thought I was going to be ready. And it's hitting you now that, oh, we are overcommitted. We have a lot of stuff going on. We did not plan our time out as well as I wish we had. And so now every morning is chaos, and every night is just like we fall on our faces and we just hope we have enough sleep to do it again tomorrow. Is it possible? I will argue, it is possible to allow ourselves to be overcommitted and overextended and in over our heads, because quite frankly, we would feel guilty if we didn't, like we were slacking in some sort of way. And so a lot of us, I would imagine, we have kids who are in various activities that have to be driven to. We have committed ourselves to all sorts of things. Or like I say we, I'm not talking about me specifically. I'm saying like we as a people, a lot of times we find ourselves like, yeah, I'll volunteer for that. I'll show up to that. I'll chaperone that thing. I will, I'll come over and walk your dog 3 times a week because you asked me to, and I feel guilty about saying no to anybody ever asking me anything, kind of thing. And so we all find ourselves kind of, or I say all, like I would imagine many of us find ourselves kind of overextended and overcommitted and in over our heads. I remember actually just day before yesterday, I was talking to a coworker who I hadn't had a conversation with in a few weeks. And he just said, hey, it's been a little while since we touched base. He said, how are things going? How are your kids? How's your family? And I said, yeah. I said, everybody's busy. And he looked at me and he goes, everybody says that. He said, tell me more, because like that can't be the only answer we have for that question. How are you? Oh, we're busy. Because if that's the only interesting thing that we have to say, like, is it possible that we are sort of venturing into like, yeah, we're just running from point A to point B, but we're learning nothing, and we're gaining sort of no like meaningful life experience because we're just trying to get to the next thing. And so the thing is, we all have 2 major limited resources. We have our time and we have our energy. And we are, again, I would imagine many of us are discovering just how limited those resources are. And I don't know about you, I hate the feeling that either of those things is being wasted. If I feel like somebody is wasting my time, I find myself feeling irrationally angry. If I feel like I am in a situation where someone is absolutely not thinking about or respecting or considering the fact that I'm gonna die someday and I'd like to use my time wisely, you know what I mean? Like that bothers me. And so if I feel like those kinds of things happen, like there's this inner voice in like this like deep at my core thing of like, no, you only have a limited amount of these resources, your time and your energy. Maybe you don't need to allow other people to monopolize and conquer and basically take control over those things. So because the thing is, you and I, we only have so much time on this earth. We talked about this a few weeks ago in terms of the whole, in our last series, we talked about just this notion of like, yeah, there's a limited amount of time and we need to be awake for our own lives. So you and I, we only have so much time, and you only have so much energy and attention to give to any particular thing. So what we're gonna do today, considering the series, this Road Trips and Realization series, we're gonna look at a series of very brief narratives. So instead of one story, we're gonna look at a handful of like, just like pieces of a story, of different stories, and kind of see if we can come up with a theme. So we're going to look at a series of brief narratives about Jesus on the move, because there's lots of stories about Jesus in motion. And so the question becomes, can we find our own place in this kind of story? So, or the question of, do these stories about Jesus show us anything about how we use our own time and our own energy? Is it possible that this feeling that we need to say yes to everything and to everyone is actually a very old impulse? Is it possible that this isn't new? This wasn't invented with the smartphone. This has been around for a very, very long time. And does Jesus actually show us a different path? So let's take a look at Luke chapter 4. So there's this narrative in Luke, and if you blink, and you can miss it, because there's an interesting thing that happens towards the end of the story that we tend to miss because of all the other stuff going on in the story. So we're going to try and like spot what's going on here. So in Luke chapter 4, beginning in verse 40, it says this: at sunset, the people brought to Jesus all who had various kinds of sickness, and laying his hands on each one, Jesus, healed them. Moreover, demons came out of many, shouting, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak because they knew he was the Messiah. So you have Jesus doing all sorts of really objectively good things. You have people who are sick who are being made well. You have people who have demons, whatever that happens to look like, and now they have less demons, which I assume less demons is usually better. So we are now in a situation where Jesus is doing good things. And then in verse 42, it says, at daybreak, Jesus went out to a solitary place. the people were looking for him. And when they came to where he was, they tried to keep him from leaving them. Because of course they are. Because Jesus is like, he's come into this place, and he has started making people's lives better. And all of a sudden, Jesus begins to withdraw, and the people are like, whoa, where are you going? There's more. And so it says, they tried to keep him from leaving there. And then in verse 43, it says, but he, Jesus, said, I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to the other towns also, because that is why I was sent. And he kept on preaching in the synagogues of Judea. What is Jesus doing? He's healing people as they come to him. And so he does this for a while. And in the morning, he's ready to go, but they want him to stay. But he leaves anyway. So you have this real, very real, measurable, pressing, good, series of things that Jesus could be doing. And people are begging him to stay, but Jesus says, I don't know what to tell you. I have to go. There is more for me to do. I cannot just stay here. I have to continue to be in motion. And so do you think, is it possible, thousands of years ago, do you think it was possible that there were a few people there who were ready to lay some guilt on for Jesus to maybe stay a little bit? You know what I mean? I realize that's a thing that only we do today, but thousands of years ago, it was also possible for people to say well, but don't you care? Why would you live? This old woman is sick. Can't you just stay long enough to fix all her and all the other people who are lined up behind her? Why would you leave when there are needs? And don't you, I thought you had a heart. I thought you cared about people. And Jesus says, yeah, I gotta go. So have you ever felt like you were expected to do it all? Have you ever felt if I don't do this thing for this person who definitely has a need, then that makes me bad in some sort of way? This is an indictment on my character. If I don't step out of whatever, if I don't offer more of myself that I actually don't have a lot of to give at this particular moment. Is it possible that we find ourselves feeling guilty for not having enough time and energy? And rather than protecting our own time or energy, we continue to pour out more and more of what we already don't have a lot of. Because if we don't, then we're gonna get hit with, oh, but I thought you cared. I guess I'll just call somebody who has a conscience. I guess that's just what I'll do. So, and I'm sure it's easy to sit here and think, well, yeah, but the thing that people need me to do, that's important, right? As opposed to what Jesus is up to, right? So I'm sure that story breaks down, or that justification breaks down a little quickly as well. It is noteworthy that Jesus does not attempt to, quote, do it all. Jesus has a boundary. Jesus has a time limit, and Jesus at some point says, I have to keep moving. To quote the great theologian Tom Petty, it's time to move on. So thank you. So there are a couple of other narratives. Actually, you see this is a pattern. This doesn't just happen this one time. Look at Luke chapter 9, verse 51. It says, as the time approached for him, Jesus, to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for, or not him, him is not Jesus. So it says, as the time approached for someone to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. So something is happening in the story. We don't have time to unpack everything, but what's happening? Something is happening. Something important is happening. And Jesus says, actually, I'm headed for Jerusalem. Good luck with all of that. So then in Luke 13, a few verses later, this is all, by the way, in the book of Luke. Luke 13, verse 22, it says, then Jesus went through the towns and villages, teaching as he made his way to Jerusalem. As he goes through the towns and villages, do you think there are sick people? Do you think there are people who have serious problems that need to be addressed? I would argue probably. It's the first century in the ancient Near East. It's very likely that there's one or two people who might need Jesus' attention. And yet it tells us Jesus keeps moving towards Jerusalem. In Luke chapter 17, verse 11, it says, now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. Luke 18, verse 31, it says, Jesus took the 12 aside and told them, we are going up to, everybody say it with me, Jerusalem. And everything that is written by the prophets about the Son of Man will be fulfilled. And then one more, Luke 19, verse 28, says, after Jesus had said this, he went on ahead going up to Jerusalem. I wonder if Luke is trying to say something. Over and over and over and over again, Luke continues to tell us, Jesus is in these different places and he's doing various things. However, at some point along the way, in every stop, it is pointed out, it is noticed that Jesus has to keep moving because he's not supposed to be where he is. He's trying to get to Jerusalem. Why? Because that's where the action is. That's where Jesus is trying to go. Like, yeah, I will do, like, Jesus is basically like, I will do what I can when I can while I am on this journey towards Jerusalem, but nothing is going to keep me from getting to Jerusalem. Again and again and again, Luke places this in the narrative. Jesus is headed for Jerusalem. There is something driving Jesus. Namely, he's got to get to Jerusalem. Every other good thing he could be doing runs through the filter of, yeah, but does this get me to Jerusalem? Like, yeah, Jesus does lots of good things, but he does it on the way to Jerusalem. So Jesus has focus. He has direction. There is no sense of, well, I have to stay like a couple of days extra because then everybody's going to be mad at me if I leave early. Like, no, Jesus says, I'm headed to Jerusalem. I appreciate the attention. I appreciate the support, but I am headed to Jerusalem. Let's jump out of Luke and go over to Matthew chapter 17. In Matthew 17, if you're unfamiliar with sort of the structure of these books, there are 4 different books about the life of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so we've looked at Luke specifically so far. Now we're jumping over to Matthew, which tells a lot of parallel stories. So in Matthew 17, verse 1, it says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. We're about to look at a story that is often referred to as the Transfiguration. So in verse 2, it says, then there he was transfigured. Jesus was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as the light. And just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Moses and Elijah are 2 critical figures in the Hebrew scriptures, what we often refer to as the Old Testament. And so basically what's happening here is some sort of divine, otherworldly experience is occurring with Jesus, and it's somehow connected to this ancient story about Moses and Elijah. And then in verse 4, it says, Peter, one of Jesus' followers, said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Peter's got a plan. Then in verse 5, it says, while he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. And this is the voice of God. So then in verse 6, it says, when the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said, don't be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them something odd. He says, don't tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. So this is interesting. Like there's all sorts, like we could do a series on this one story. This is a crazy story. So there is this big miraculous event happening, and Jesus brings 3 people with him to experience it. And when it's over, Jesus says, hold on to this story for just a little while. We will tell this story eventually, but for now, this needs to just kind of stay inside this small group. Here's why this is significant. In Luke 10, we are told that Jesus appoints 72 followers of his to be a part of what he's doing. In Matthew 11, so a few chapters before this story, in Matthew 11, we're told that Jesus has finished instructing what are referred to as the 12. This is generally, if you're talking about Jesus's like core group of disciples, we tend to think of it in terms of the number 12, right? Because that we tend to talk about them like these are the 12 disciples. If you look at the Da Vinci painting of the Last Supper, there are 12 disciples. So 12 tends to be the number that we associate with the number of people who are following Jesus at this time. But we also know there were a larger group of 72. There is the 12. And then Acts actually tells us later on that there was a core group of 120 followers that made up the early church. So you have almost these concentric circles. You have 120, and then there's a smaller circle of 72 inside that. And then there's an inner circle made up of 12. And then inside that inner circle, there's an inner circle that's apparently just these 3. So what's going on here? Well, Jesus clearly knows he can't take 72 people up to the mountain with him for this event. And also then personally interact with and have a like meaningful conversation with that many people. You can't have a meaningful, in-depth conversation with 72 people all in one night. So Jesus seems to go deeper and deeper with fewer and fewer people. Jesus understands that his time and his energy and his attention are a limited resource. And if that is true for Jesus, it might also be true for you. So our world today is we are constantly available to each other, are we not? We have smartphones, we have social media, we have notifications about notifications. We have so like we are as available as we are willing to be at all times. And what this does is it fabricates the illusion that you are obligated and expected to keep up with everybody at all times. I remember when I was a pastor in Texas, I remember there was a situation where a person in our church had to have an emergency appendectomy. And so his wife posted on Facebook, "Please be praying for my husband. We just admitted him to the hospital. He has to be rushed into surgery." I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook. I didn't see it. And so a few days later, I got an email, a very angry email from this man's wife saying, "I can't believe you didn't visit him while we were in the hospital." I had no idea he was in the hospital. But she posted it on Facebook, and I didn't see it. But the fact that she posted it set out an expectation that everyone she knows, especially the pastor of the church she was attending, should know and respond to that. So if I'm not as available as that, then all of a sudden I have upset somebody by not being that available. So the expectation is if I post something, I am owed your attention and I am owed your response. Or if I send you a text, no matter what time of day, no matter what else is happening in your life, you need to stop what you're doing and respond as quickly as possible, or we're gonna have a problem. How many of us, we have people in our lives who every single time you see their name, you think like, I've got about 10 minutes before this becomes a problem. You know what I mean? And it's not because the text is important, it's because this person expects you to be very, very available. And at a certain point, this level of availability becomes completely unsustainable. It's unhealthy. And then we get filled with all sorts of guilt and shame about not being able to keep up with everybody and everything. And so this piles on and we carry this with us and we lose sleep and it affects our like actual in real time relationships because there's a part of our brain where the wheels are spinning of like, that person's probably mad at me because it took me too long to respond. Or that person's probably mad at me because I didn't see their post early enough and respond in the way that they would have expected me to. And so we, at a certain point, a lot of us, I would imagine, carry around, again, this like enormous feeling of pressure and guilt over like any amount of unavailability. But look back at these stories about Jesus. We find Jesus perpetually moving towards Jerusalem and spending time with only 3 of his followers instead of 72. He never apologizes to the others. He never goes back to the rest of the 12 and like, look, we only had enough room for 3 of you. Next time, you guys can come with me too. He doesn't do that. He never, as far as we know, he never apologizes for setting boundaries. Jesus never apologizes for understanding and responding to his own like limitations. And we tend to talk about Jesus in terms of like, you know, God incarnate, which is appropriate and theologically correct. But we also have to talk about Jesus as like, Jesus is human. Jesus has limitations because Jesus has humanity, just like the rest of us. So Jesus doesn't apologize to the 12. He doesn't apologize to the other 72. He doesn't make excuses. When he leaves town, he doesn't say, look, really, if I can, I'll try and circle back. I'm really sorry I have to go. He doesn't do that. What does he do? He says, I'm headed to Jerusalem. I'll see you. So Jesus responds to and understands his own limitations. Look at John chapter 4. In John chapter 4, beginning of verse 4. And I have to apologize. I submitted this passage incompletely. This is supposed to go through verse 8. So if you want to see everything I'm going to read, if you have like an app on your phone, you can take a look at it, or an actual Bible. I don't know why that wasn't the first thing I said. So John chapter 4, verse 4 says this. It says, now he, Jesus, had to go through Samaria. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Joseph's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. So whoa. Jesus, the Son of God, is tired? Jesus needs to sit down? And it says it was about noon. And then in verse 7, it says, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, will you give me a drink? Because his disciples had gone into town to buy food. So Jesus is tired. Jesus gets thirsty. They're going to buy food, presumably so that Jesus can have something to eat because Jesus gets hungry. So Jesus is tired and he sits down. He's thirsty and he asks for water. He's beat. And at this point, he stops and he allows the disciples to go buy the food without him. And he asks a stranger for a drink because he's thirsty. Jesus has limitations. He doesn't express that he feels guilty over not being able to go and help carry the food back. He doesn't say like, look, next time I'll take a turn. He doesn't do that. As far as we can see, none of that happens. Jesus is tired. He sits down. He lets the disciples go get the food. Jesus has limitations, and he seems pretty okay with it. Jesus seems to live with this incredibly well-honed sense of focus and boundaries, as well as an understanding of his own limitations. There's only so much a human being can do, even if that human being also happens to be the Son of God. So there's all sorts of stuff kind of swirling around. Jesus understands that there's only so much time, and there's only so much attention. And sometimes my need to do everything needs to be kind of dealt with so that I can do the right things. So in fact, there's a philosopher named Soren Kierkegaard who, and I love this quote, I use this quote all the time. The quote on the next slide is, "Purity of heart is to will the one thing." What does this mean? It means you can't do everything. And so Kierkegaard is writing, he's saying, a lot of times we feel, not unlike my philosophy professor, we feel like our life is being wasted because we're trying to do all the things. We're trying to constantly be in motion at all times just for the sake of being in motion. It's one thing to be in motion because you're actually trying to get somewhere. It's another thing to be in motion, but you're actually kind of more like a hamster in a wheel, and you're just moving because the world will judge you if you stop moving. And so what Kierkegaard is saying is, you are on a journey. Your life is a series of movements. And anytime I am in motion and pursuing the thing that I was created to do, becoming the person I was created to be, anytime I am allowing my limitations not to slow me down, but to guide sort of the decisions that I make, all of a sudden I'm doing what Kierkegaard is explaining when he says to will the one thing. I'm willing the one thing. What's the one thing for Jesus? I got to get to Jerusalem. Like, yes, all these other things are good. They're healthy. They are beneficial. They are making the world a better place. But the one thing is, I got to get to Jerusalem. And that means sometimes I have to say no. Sometimes I have to call it a night. Sometimes you want me to stay, and I'm telling you, I got to go. Why? Because willing the one thing isn't, I got to make everybody happy all the time. Willing the one thing is, I got to get to Jerusalem. There's a writer named Ronald Rolheiser who wrote a book called The Holy Longing. Highly recommend this book. But Rolheiser writes this. He says, why is Mother Teresa so unbelievably, he's writing about the life of Mother Teresa. He says, why is Mother Teresa so unbelievably powerful? She could, and he's quoting Kierkegaard, he says, she could will the one thing, God and the poor. In other words, if you look at the life of Mother Teresa, every single decision was made in the mindset of, I am trying to serve God and I'm trying to serve the poor. Any other thing other than that is getting in my way. And so that is what I'm created to do. So the question becomes, for each of us, what does that look like? What does it look like for me to will the one thing? What happens, and by the way, what happens when I don't will the one thing? What happens when I don't allow this to sort of be a guiding sort of principle is I get fractured. I get disjointed. I become so unaware of what I'm even up to. I'm just trying to like put out the next fire. And it becomes all about sort of like crisis management and not who was I created to be? What kind of life am I trying to live? Am I just trying to be a person who every time somebody says, how are you? The only thing I can come up with to say is really busy. Or is it possible that we are called to will the one thing in terms of like, yeah, the more I am able to identify, this is what it looks like for me to really kind of be in the pocket of this is what my life is meant to look like. This is what my time is really for. Then all of a sudden, like you're kind of cooking a little bit. Otherwise, we get disjointed, we get fractured, we get disintegrated as people. So, and so what gets us though is, as a people, specifically as 21st century Americans, we love choices. We love to have, I don't know if you, okay, my daughter had a birthday about a month ago, and her favorite place to eat is the Cheesecake Factory. Please don't judge her. So Oklahoma City has such good food. So we go to the Cheesecake Factory. You ever looked at the menu in the Cheesecake Factory? It's a beast. There are dictionaries that aren't as long as the menu at Cheesecake Factory. So you open up the menu at the Cheesecake Factory and you're like, I don't know what I'm gonna order, but it's probably not gonna be the best thing on the menu. So we love choices, but the problem with choices is choices like paralyze us. There's a really interesting, another book I want to recommend. There's a book by a psychologist named Barry Schwartz, and the title of the book is The Paradox of Choice. So interesting. But basically, he gets into the psychology of, the more choices you have, the less satisfied you become with whatever decision you ultimately make. So psychologically, you will never feel like you got the best item at the Cheesecake Factory because there's always like 1,000 other things that you could have chosen. But if you go to a restaurant with, say, 2 items on the menu, if you've ever been to Fort Worth, Texas, Babe's Chicken, that's what I would do. So that's my death row meal, by the way, if anybody's wondering. But Babe's Chicken, you go to Babe's Chicken in Roanoke, Texas, there are 2 things on the menu. There's fried chicken and chicken fried steak, and everybody knows you're not supposed to get the chicken fried steak. So fight me. But you go, and everybody who goes to Babe's Chicken walks out feeling like, I got the best possible meal I could have gotten at Babe's Chicken. Why? Because you didn't have a whole lot of choices. So what gets us is we have all of these choices, and the more choices we have, the more like paralyzed and fractured and self-doubting we become. But if we narrow our choices down and it becomes like, oh, I'm just trying to will the one thing. What does it look like for me to continue the metaphor? What does it look like for me to get to Jerusalem? Anything that isn't on the path towards Jerusalem, whatever my Jerusalem may be, that will slow me down. That will cause drag. And so this other thing may be something really good that somebody should probably do, but that's not on my path. That's not part of my journey towards Jerusalem. And I have to be okay with that. And there's gonna be guilt sometimes associated with that, and people for sure will try and give you guilt. Do not let them. If it's something they really feel like needs to be done, that's something that maybe is on their plate to do. So with Jesus, there are so many great things that he could be doing, but he stays on the path to Jerusalem. He chooses not to do certain things because every decision, and that's sort of the insidious thing about making choices, is it not? Because every time you make a choice, every yes is actually quietly 1,000 no's. Because I'm saying yes to this one thing, but what I'm implicitly doing is I'm saying by doing this, I am not going to do all these other options that I'm choosing not to do, right? So what Jesus is doing is he's not just choosing what to do by moving towards Jerusalem, he's choosing what not to do. I will not stay in this town for as long as they want me to stay. I will not linger in these places. I will not deviate from the path. I have to get to Jerusalem. You can see this in every dimension. Anytime your time or your energy is on the table, this is part of the story. You could talk about this in terms of relationships. If everyone gets your attention whenever they want, will you really have time to invest in the relationships that you really do need to pay attention to? If every phone call is an emergency, then am I giving attention to people when there are actually people who do rely on me and do need my attention? I am aggressively boundaried, I will say, and to the frustration of many people in my life, including a lot of my coworkers. I have a rule, like unless there is actually a fire that only and I'm the only fire extinguisher in town, don't call me after 5:30 p.m. I will not answer. And if it's work related, if it in any way requires me to take my attention away from my family or the thing that my whatever metaphorically Jerusalem I am trying to get to, and you are blowing up my phone, you're gonna have to wait. And I don't say that to be mean or cold or anything like that. I say that because I understand my own limitations. I understand I have so much time in this world, and I can't spend it trying to manage everybody else's feelings about how I use my energy. Are you with me? So my hope is that this will also set you free. I'm not just talking about myself. I'm saying this is true for all of us. We all have a limited amount of relational bandwidth. Another way this shows up is in how we use our time. You only have so much of it. The clock is always ticking, not to make it seem like dire or whatever, but like you have so much time, and that's life. And you are allowed to draw up limits for yourself. You are allowed to say no when you need to. You are allowed to turn your phone off. You are allowed to focus on the thing that's in front of you and not constantly be subconsciously trying to solve problems that are not yours to solve. I try to be aggressively boundaried. And this, by the way, this is why I am constantly in sermons, to an exhaustive degree, I'm constantly saying, I don't work here, because I'm trying to let everybody know, including myself, that beyond what I'm doing right now, none of this other stuff that bothers you here is any of my business. And that's, and I don't envy the people for whom it is their business, but it's not mine. So, but I mean, it's not to say I don't care about this place. It's not to say that when I'm here doing this, I'm not giving it everything I've got. I'm just saying this is the boundary. The boundary is I will do everything I can to make sure the Sunday morning services and the sermons are as good and engaging and helpful as they possibly can be. But that's as far as we go, as far as my my direct involvement here. And I hope that's okay. If it's not, that's okay too. So, but how we use our, but because the thing is, again, I have another job. I have other like obligations. I have a family that does sometimes seem to enjoy my company. And so I try and accommodate to some degree on that level. And so how we use our time and energy in many ways demonstrates what we believe our life is about and our like the meaning of our time is for. And so what I hope here in all of this, I hope this conversation can help you. I hope it can help each of us maybe be set free from whatever guilt or shame you might feel over not being able to do everything for everyone. Sometimes you gotta say no, and you don't have to apologize for it. And sometimes willing the one thing, following the path you were created to travel, means sometimes I have to say no to some things that are actually pretty good. Sometimes I have to say no to good things in order to pursue the right thing. And as we enter the school year, or whatever this next season of time looks like for you, maybe a really healthy question each of us could ask ourselves is, what does it look like for me to will the one thing right now? What is metaphorically, what is my Jerusalem? Where am I trying to go? Am I following a lot of side quests that are not mine to follow? Or am I actually pursuing the use of my time that only I can do? Because that's what my Jerusalem is. So may you be set free from all of the ways you are allowing guilt or shame to dictate your time and your focus. No, by the way, no one will protect your boundaries if you don't. So, because it is tempting, this is sort of a side thing, but it is tempting when your phone rings on your day off, or if you're in the middle of something and someone from work is trying to get a hold of you, it's tempting to get mad about that at them. But the thing is, it's not their job to protect your boundaries. They clearly have boundary problems on their own that they should probably be dealing with, but it's not their job to protect your boundaries. It's yours. No one will do it if you don't. So may you be set free from all the ways that you have allowed guilt or shame to dictate your time and your focus. And may you find that you are coming to life in all kinds of new ways because you are willing the one thing and you are traveling the path you were created to travel. May you find that the word no is a powerful, empowering word for you.